all over Kabul, there's different parts of the city that have been destroyed by the fighting, but there's the rebuilding going on, and this is what's happening here. And also just a sense that Afghanistan moves on, and Afghans have known this destruction, and they've been able to move on, and there's the hope that that's going to happen even more.
Special delight to see so many people turn out on a night such as this to hear our speaker. My name's Jerry Brown. I'm the Dean of the Journalism School. I would like to say that the Journalism School is happy to claim some share of the sponsorship for this, but the truth of the matter is that Laurie Pingelly Drake of the Honors College is responsible for almost all of the details that went into that. She and the excellent Kathleen Wetzel, who actually does run the Journalism School. In the best of all possible worlds, professors stand in front of classes and students are rapt. Their eyes are moist. They're curious for knowledge. They're on the edge of their seats. They forget all about their text messaging. And you look out and you know that you are inspiring and instructing and changing their lives. In reality, of course, we know that most of them are hungover, bored, and can hardly wait to get out of there. In the best of all possible worlds, however, professors learn as much from students as, or perhaps more, than students learn from professors. And I think everybody here who's been a teacher know that that's something other than just sentimental fiddle-faddle. I had the pleasure of teaching Jacob Bainham, or being in the class where Jacob Bainham was a student, and I and his colleagues in the class learned a very great deal from him. I am especially proud that the University of Montana attracts students of Jacob's caliber. Many of you read the piece in the Missoulian, and I know that you already know a good deal about Jacob's background. His parents worked in a rural development project. Father is British, mother English, and Jacob as a child moved around from India to Laos and along the and various other places in Asia, and he learned a number of languages. It boggles my mind to think of what he has learned, and he speaks Farsi, Hindi, Lao, French. He now can even do a Southern accent fairly well, and that should carry him a long way in life. This past summer, he went to Wales, where he was able to see how people live in a land where there's a severe vowel shortage, and then he went on to Afghanistan, where he worked and learned a good deal about that country that he's going to tell us about later. I want to tell you that I had a serious conversation with Jacob, and I still feel this way. I think Jacob would be an ideal candidate for a Rhodes Scholarship. And Jacob told me that he simply he's always been extremely well-mannered young man, and he made me feel good about the fact that he would take it under consideration. But his lifetime goal is to be a foreign correspondent. I can't think of anybody who, by virtue of his upbringing, birth, interest, ability to write, ability to present himself to the public, is better suited for that. Many of you tonight will see and hear Jacob Bainham for the first time, but I predict it will certainly not be the last time. It's my pleasure to present Jacob Bainham.
Thank you, Dean Brown, for those kind words. And thank you, everyone, for showing up tonight. I know it's a cold, wet one out there, and my microphone's stuck in my pocket. So what I'm going to do tonight is talk not for very long, because I know it gets boring at times, and it's not reference to you, Dean Brown, but it gets boring at times to listen to long lectures. My purpose here today is to show photographs and tell you some stories of an amazing country and an amazing people that I had the privilege to meet and to experience this summer. My beginnings in Afghanistan started 11 years ago now, when I was 11 years old, on a family holiday. And Afghanistan's not the first destination that jumps to mind when you think family holiday. But my family was living in India at the time, and my parents thought that a lull in the civil war that had gone on after the Russian invasion was a perfect opportunity to see Afghanistan and to expose their children to some dangers and some adventures. And so rather unwittingly, my sister and I followed along. We traipsed onto the airplane and landed in Kabul. And I can tell you it's no small thing for an 11-year-old boy to be in a country at war. And there was nothing like it. I was amazed by what I saw, and I would walk around the streets and there were bullet shells at my feet. I started a collection until my bag wasn't big enough to hold them all shapes and sizes, from pistols to anti-aircraft shells. But I started a collection, and I saw what it was like for this country to be fighting. One night we hid out under as a warlord came by with his planes and dropped some bombs on the city of Kabul. And it was exciting, it was exhilarating. But I also saw more than that when I was there. I saw a people that were proud to be Afghan and generous and hospitable. Many took us into their homes and fed us lavish feasts underneath mulberry trees, and it was like a scene out of 1001 Arabian Nights. Really an amazing country of amazing people. And that shone through even despite all the fighting and violence that had torn the country apart for upwards of 20 years at the time. So when I left Afghanistan at age 11, I knew that I'd be back someday. Even then I knew. And the 11 years since, I've been reading books and looking at photographs, doing whatever I can to learn about the country, and it really took my heart. Well, 11 years later, just this past summer, I had the opportunity to travel again to Afghanistan and to work on a journalism internship in Kabul with the Open Media Fund. When I arrived in Kabul, I noticed immediately many differences. The airport, for example, it was cleared of the old decaying carcasses of Soviet planes that lined the runways before. It was cleared of that. The streets were freshly paved and cleared of the bullet shells. You could buy US military supplies in the bazaars, things that had fallen off the back of the truck, they say euphemistically. Most likely they were pilfered at some stage of the game. But there were many changes, but there were also many things that were the same. And there was the same fierce pride of being Afghan, and the same joyful, hospitable nature, the same willingness to invite a complete stranger into your home and feed them and shelter them. So what I was doing in Afghanistan, I was working with the Open Media Fund, which was set up by a famous journalist, a Pakistani journalist named Ahmed Rashid. And he set the Open Media Fund up 3 years ago as an effort to foster Afghan media and to get it started as a building block for a civil society, which is something that Afghanistan's been missing for the past 30 years. It's going through some rough times. The Open Media Fund focuses on print media, and literacy rates in Afghanistan are still appalling. They're 20% for females and 50% for males. At the same time, there is a burgeoning press in Afghanistan, and it's exciting to watch. There's 2 major television stations, there's radio stations, there's all sorts of news coming out, there's literary publications of poetry and drama. It's exciting to see what's happening in Afghanistan in print media, and especially after the years of the Taliban, where any media that was there was controlled by the government and certainly wasn't free by any means. I spent the first month working with the Open Media Fund, helping out with editing on the English language website and helping out in roundtable discussions, also in journalistic training sessions. But the second month, I had the opportunity to freelance some articles, and this was one of my major missions, for my goals for myself in Afghanistan, was to take some of the stories and send them back to the West. I had, because of my experience as a child in Afghanistan, I knew that there were stories that were going untold in the country. I knew that there was more to Afghanistan than just the latest body counts coming out of the south, the latest dozen Taliban dead, the latest suicide bomb in Kabul. I knew there were stories beyond that, and I wanted to make sure that some of them got out into the Western media. So I had the opportunity to freelance. Anyone that's tried that, I'm sure several of you have, know it's not an easy thing to do, and I got many rejections. I did get 2 stories in the San Francisco Chronicle, which was a real joy for me to give some stories of Afghanistan and have them see the light of day in the West, especially in America, a country that's so involved in Afghanistan right now. What I saw in Afghanistan was, in talking to Afghans, mainly in the north, I didn't travel to the south. It's too dangerous now, and there's certainly a lot of danger in embedding with the British or the Canadian military, which control a large part of the south. But what I saw in talking to Afghans around Kabul, also in Herat in western Afghanistan and in the northern provinces, was a real frustration that 5 years had gone by since the Taliban were removed, but there's very little change. And the change that people are looking for are changes in poverty, changes in the economy. Right now, 30% of Afghans are unemployed. And there's a real frustration. Karzai has come out and said that if Afghanistan had a quarter of the money going into Iraq right now, it would be well on its way to a safe and stable democracy. I think that's going a bit far. The Afghans have already seen a lot of money come into the country, $26 billion in the last 4 years, but have seen very little come of it. And there's a frustration, there's not the antipathy that you might expect towards Americans in Afghanistan right now. There's a realization that Afghanistan can't do this alone, move from the remnants of war into a safe, stable, democratic country. There's a real strong desire to, but there's also a realization that they need help in doing that. So there's a benevolence towards the Americans, which at times is strained. And it's strained particularly when Afghans are not seeing changes in jobs, changes in education, when they're facing the same poverty they had under more secure conditions under the Taliban. Right now, I feel that there are 3 major areas that need attention in Afghanistan: education, infrastructure, and jobs. These are the building blocks of any stable country. And for 30 years now, Afghanistan has been robbed of these by war, incessant war. And you can imagine what it would be like to grow up. A lot of people my age had grown up not knowing what it was like to have a police force or a school to go to on a regular basis, or the likelihood of a job in the future, or maybe their father having a job and a stable income. So these are areas that Afghans really want to see progress in, right? And they're pivotal in other areas as well. Right now, a lot of education that goes on, if a family has any money, they'll send their children to Pakistan and to some of the religious schools in Pakistan, which is where a lot of the Taliban are trained and bred into this fervor that brings them back into Afghanistan along the porous border to make bombs and to wreak havoc in their country. As far as jobs go, everything is imported now in Afghanistan. You walk through the bazaars, everything comes from Iran, everything comes from Pakistan or India. There's a real shame in this almost. Afghans have a real pride in their history and their previous greatness. And they were once the suppliers of fruit to all of Central Asia and raisins, and they once had trade networks. They were along the Silk Roads. They had trade networks stretching across the empires. Now there's very little produced in Afghanistan. There's And along those lines as well, there's very little infrastructure. Roads are shot, the bridges have been bombed and are slow to be repaired. Infrastructure, a related issue to that is opium. Afghanistan now supplies 92% of the world's opium, which is produced into heroin. And a large part of that is because, for example, if you're a farmer in a village in the middle of nowhere, with no road or no bridge and no access to a market, it's unlikely that you'll decide to grow a crop of potatoes or a crop of onions. Every value, all the value in this crop will be lost in transporting it to a market. But a crop of opium, on the other hand, can be packed onto the back of a donkey, ridden over the hills to a drug lord, and you have an annual income. And that will pay for your family's food for the year. There are, ironically enough, there's a lot of money to be made in a sick way in a country that's coming out of war. There's a lot of venture capitalists in Afghanistan now from all around the world investing in telecommunications and soft drinks. These are two of the biggest industries that have come into Afghanistan now. Telecommunications largely because Afghanistan has no telephone lines after so much fighting. And soft drinks because it's just an obvious industry. To get people into Coca-Cola and drinking it and get them hooked at a young age. A $25 million plant was just built in September in Afghanistan by Coca-Cola, so you can see that industry will continue to grow. There's also the reverse brain drain in Afghanistan. There's a lot of Afghans, a lot of the diaspora came back after the Taliban were evicted from Afghanistan. They came back to help the country in what ways they could. A lot of businessmen came back. A lot of the investment in Afghanistan now is from fellow Afghans who have come back to try and get their country back to how they remember it in the past. I'm not going to claim to be able to make any big predictions on what might happen in Afghanistan or the best solution in Afghanistan. I'm just here tonight to show you pictures and tell you some stories. But why I titled this talk between Karzai and Kalashnikov is that Afghanistan now is hanging in balance between Karzai, Hamid Karzai, and the democratic government that he represents, and the Taliban, the rule of the gun that are rising from the south, and whose funding lies in Pakistan and Saudi Arabia and will never dry up. Karzai, on his part, is liked in Afghanistan, particularly amongst the intelligentsia in Kabul. He's liked, but he's not respected. And this is a pivotal issue amongst Afghan leaders. The leaders in the past, like Daud Khan, who ruled in the 70s, they were respected warriors. People like Ahmed Shah Massoud, who died 2 days before 9/11, they were respected, charismatic warriors, and they could rally the country behind them. Hamid Karzai is intelligent. He's from the Pashtun tribe, the majority tribe, 40% in Afghanistan. But he doesn't have the charisma to rally the whole nation behind him. There's a real fear that if he continues to fail in uniting the country, and if the US and NATO troops pull out of Afghanistan, that the country will fall back into civil war. A good example of this is the director of the Open Media Fund and a close friend of mine. We'd often sit at night and reading Hafez and enjoying a glass of illicit Russian vodka. And we'd sit and talk about Afghanistan, its past, its present, and its the hopes for a future. He told me that he's a very intelligent man, a very middle class man. He had a lot of things going for him, a lot of resources. He learned English by listening to BBC reports as a child. Just picked up English. Now he's fluent. But he kept a Kalashnikov buried under his mud floor in his bedroom, in the fear that if the military president, the foreign military presence, leaves Afghanistan, that there will be a civil war, the Taliban will rise from the south, and that he will be one of the many to die trying to stop them. Without jobs and education and any form of industry, there is little hope in Afghanistan. But if this can be provided, then the Taliban will lose their power. The Taliban will be in vacuum, and there will be no need for them. Right now, Afghans are looking for stability wherever they can find it. after 5 years have gone by, there's increasing distrust that the U.S. and foreign militaries can provide them this security, and so more and more people are turning to the Taliban to provide this sense of justice and security. The unemployment levels are continuing to rise. There was a great cartoon in one of the publications in Kabul, a newspaper, that illustrated this. There was an Afghan man pouring water on a tree, and the water bucket was labeled foreign NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and the tree was labeled development. And the tree was growing, but at the top of the tree was a rope, and it formed a noose around his neck. So as the tree grows, as Afghanistan develops, it will lynch the Afghans because it's not a sustainable development. A lot of the jobs in Kabul now are with NGOs, small short-term projects that will go on for the next few years. And then when the money dries up, so does the hope for these Afghans working with them. And along those lines, there's a real feeling in development in the world, not just in Afghanistan, in the whole world, of the West helping out the third world. And there is some truth to that. The West has resources and has the education and skills to help and do a great deal of good in the world. And but what's not as sexy, to be honest, is Afghans helping Afghans, which in the end is the only thing that will change anything. Afghans learning through capacity building and through the West helping and teaching them and teaching fellow Afghans. It's not an ethnocentric model like exists now. It's something relying on the pride and power of the Afghan people to rejuvenate and to take hold of their country once again, which is what they want. And inshallah, as they say in Afghanistan, God willing, is what will happen. I'm going to show some photographs now, and we'll have time for question and answer afterwards. Here is a map of Afghanistan. So there's Kabul there, and that's where I spent the most of my time. I also had the opportunity to travel out to Herat, which is there in the western end of Afghanistan, very close to Iran, in a famous area for literature and the arts. I also had, and I'll show these later on in the photographs, I also had the chance to travel up to the Wakhan corridor, this amazing strip of country which is one of the most remote places on the planet. It was created originally as a buffer zone between the Russian and British empires when they were playing the great game in the 1800s, fighting for territory in Afghanistan. This is the Kabul River in the old part of the city, and it's dried up in recent years and is looking a bit miserable. It's filled with trash and discarded shoes and all kind of rubbish. There's goats that graze there in the daytime. But you can get a bit of a picture there of Kabul. It's a city built on the mountains. It's quite high in elevation. It's about 5,000 feet, and so it's quite cool. And it's an old city built along the mountainsides. This is a mosque there, an old mosque from the early 1900s, again a landmark of Kabul. This is just a common streetscape. It's near where I lived. I lived at the foot of that mountain, and it's a bus stand and people milling about. It's still very unsafe to walk at night in Kabul. They certainly don't recommend it as a foreigner. But even Afghans will stay inside and with their families at night instead of going out into the city. And this is in Kabul, and that's a real thing that Afghans have a problem with, is that if Kabul can't be secure, how can the whole country be secure? These are two children rummaging through the garbage. One of them tried to sell me a pack of gum for $1, and there's a lot of poverty that exists in a lot of Afghanistan, and especially in Kabul. A lot of refugees have ended up in Kabul trying to find jobs and haven't been able to do that. And here they are rummaging through the trash. They get some money for returning the aluminum cans and recycling, so they do what they can to make it. there's all over Kabul, there's different parts of the city that have been destroyed by the fighting, but there's the rebuilding going on, and this is what's happening here. And also just a sense that Afghanistan moves on, and Afghans have known this destruction, and they've been able to move on, and there's the hope that that's going to happen even more in the future. These are some of the bullet holes. When I came back this past summer, there weren't the bullet shells on the ground like there were when I was a child, but there were still the bullet shells in the walls. They're less easy to remove. This is a common, just a market down the road from where I was living. During the Civil War, the city was fought over by various warlords and who controlled different parts of the city and battled with each other non-stop. This is Ahmad Shah Massoud, the charismatic leader of the Northern Alliance Army, who died 2 days before September 11th. He was killed by a suicide bomb. He's now a national hero. When you leave the plane at Kabul International Airport, there's two huge posters that greet you. One is of Hamid Karzai calling for national unity, and the other is Ahmad Shah Massoud there with his charismatic Pakul hat, his Tajik hat, and his typical furrowed brow. And it's ironic. He's sort of the Che Guevara of Afghanistan. He had a lot of blood on his hands, just like every other warlord. But now they're trying to rally behind him, and Karzai is trying to put him to the forefront as a national hero, as an icon. And there's the hope that he will represent something around which the new future Afghanistan can revolve. But he's also a man of war, like many great leaders in Afghan history. This is another scene from Kabul, just roadblocks that have been cleared away. A lot of Kabul is built on the mountainsides here, although that's usually where the poorer people live, and some people who live in the main part of Kabul think it's unsafe to go up there. This is my room and my office in the Open Media Fund compound. It was simple, but it had a great view, and I looked out over it every day and saw the dust storms coming in, and as the heat built towards the latter part of the summer. I brought my guitar along because I like to play, and the man in the Dubai airport said, "So you taking that to Afghanistan?" And I said, yes. I was thinking he's gonna tell me off for bringing a guitar on the plane, that I'll have to check it, and I have to go through that hassle. And so I resolved to listen to his lecture. He said, "But why take that? You should take a gun." And so I didn't do a whole lot to ease my tension. This is the compound that I stayed in Kabul. It was just a beautiful. The Afghans are really skilled at creating a courtyard of peace and a garden and a place to eat and lounge and relax. We had a great old gardener here that would look after the grounds. He was a wiry old man with a fiery temper, and he told us off for playing volleyball because we were killing the grass. So he cancelled the volleyball sessions for his grass. But there's all of these mountaintops were where the rocket launchers were during the Civil War, and during when the Russians invaded in 1979. Right from then till just not too long, a few years ago, it was all a staging ground for battle. And now there's the hope that it'll offer scenic views instead of good rocket launching positions. This is a dust storm outside of Kabul. We're going to a village out near the mountains, and there's two tents here. There's tents in the lower left-hand corner of the Kuchi nomads, shepherds that travel all around Afghanistan, and they're often the poorest parts of the poorest community members, the nomads. And this is a man we stopped to ask directions from. He didn't have a whole lot of confidence in us, we could tell, because he didn't ask for a ride. When we were going to his village, he said, "Yeah, it's in that direction. Good luck." He was walking himself, and he got there before us, actually. This is a truck just heading out in the northern side of Kabul. the Afghans take great pride in their trucks, and they paint them all kinds of colors, and it looks like a circus sometimes. It's great. And a kid being ambitious, catching a ride on the back of one, probably going to school or skipping out, no doubt. This is a bakery right down the road from where I lived, and there were 7 brothers who were involved in this, and they'd make about 2,000 loaves of naan bread, which is about a meter long. It's a flatbread that Afghanistan lives on, 3 meals a day. It's the staple. They would make about 2,000 loaves a day, 7 days a week, non-stop. So I had been buying bread from them all summer, and then I spent the morning with them just taking pictures and hearing about what they do. They work around this clay oven here, the tandoor oven, which is really hot in the heat of an Afghan summer. It's back-breaking work, about 14, 15 hours a day. But they're in there with no real sense of hardship, just that's their life and that's their livelihood, and they do it. The wheat doesn't come from Afghanistan. Only 12% of the land of Afghanistan is arable, so a lot of crops have to come in from the surrounding countries. The wheat comes down on a Russian truck from Turkmenistan, travels a long way to get there. This is a roadside bomb in. There was a period of about 4 days where Kabul was hit by multiple bombs. A lot of them are not as powerful as the bombs that are going off in Iraq. A lot of them are not suicide bombs, although that's an increasingly used tactic now. This bomb targeted a government bus that was traveling with members of the police force, and it was just the bomb was in a roadside cart, and it, as the bus went by, the bomb detonated. The driver lost control of the vehicle. This is shrapnel on the wall from the bomb. The driver lost control of the bus, and he ended up crashing into a gas bottling shop, which was a real disaster here, which was right next to a firewood shop. So this is the firewood now that's out here in the street, and. But fortunately, despite all that, only about 2 people died. But there's a real feeling after these bomb attacks, people clear up and life is back to normal. People are buying their bread, people are buying flowers, whatever it is they're doing. Afghans are used to it in a sad way. This is another bomb that went off near the Ministry of Justice. All the windows were blown out. Unfortunately, the model Kabul is having for development now is Dubai, which is it's the Las Vegas of the Middle East, you could say, filled with glass and lights and everything. So there's an idea that this is the way to the future, is lights and glitz like that. So a lot of the buildings, this is not even a great example, but a lot of the buildings are just solid glass and blue and green, nice reflective colors. They don't survive the bomb attacks well. They also lose a lot of heat in the summer, and they're not very good for insulation at all. But this, they were clearing this up. 1 person died in this attack. There's blood on the street, in the gutter. A checkpoint, a police checkpoint, was ripped apart like a tinderbox. This is the hill above where I stayed in Kabul. They told me, don't go up on that hill. There's the Taliban up there, and they'll slit your throat. And I thought, well, the entire hillside could not be insurgents. I didn't believe them that they were all bad. So I went up. I dressed up like I am now, and I went up. And I actually followed this policeman up, and it was fine. You know, there's a lot that happens in Afghanistan is sort of coincidental and it's anecdotal. This I engaged people and spoke with them, and they were curious to see me there. They thought I was lost, getting into this rough part of town, but they treated me very well. They invited me for tea several times, and this policeman was going home to his family. He was carrying a watermelon under his arm after a long day's work. So now I had the opportunity to fly out to Herat. There are roads that go to Herat, but the only two are one down in the south, which goes through some of the heart of the Taliban country, the most dangerous parts of the country now. And there's a road that does go through the north, but there's huge sections of it that are missing, and so that's not a viable alternative. So the best route is flight. On Ariana Airlines, which is also called Scariana Airlines, or Inshallah Airways. The pilots do actually say it will be in Herat or so-and-so, inshallah, in 2 hours. So it doesn't inspire the greatest deal of confidence, but I got there, and it's great service. That has to be said about it. This is the scene of the Shakespeare play that I attended and wrote about, and I wrote a story about it for the San Francisco Chronicle. It's a pretty stunning backdrop. This is an 800-year-old citadel in Herat. When Herat was built, when Herat was one of the greatest cities in the world, and a real thoroughfare of trade and the arts, and the central location of an empire. So underneath these massive walls of mud and straw and brick, we laid a stage of carpets, and the acting troupe, which was all Afghan actors acting in Dari, performed Shakespeare's Love's Labour's Lost, which was an interesting choice because of its Taliban-esque theme, where the king and his cohorts sign a pact that they will study and they will go without food and not see women, much like the Taliban claim to have done. But the theme of it, the message, is that it's actually not such a good idea to make these pacts that you can't live up to, and that in the end it can be destructive. So there were female actors in the play, and it sent ripples through the crowd of about 250, 40% of which were women, remarkable turnout rate. But most of the crowd was overjoyed to see the arts return to Herat, a place that once claimed the greatest poets of the world. This is a bridge just outside of Herat, also very old. I don't know exactly how old. And the rumor here was that the queen of the time, for 3 years, her and her friends collected eggs, and they made the mortar out of eggshell, and ground it all up, and because it would be the most stable. And here it is today, looking good as new. And the mortar, when you do flake off a bit, it does. I don't know if it's true or not, but it does feel like an eggshell. Same consistency. This is an entryway to a mosque. There's just incredible architecture there, going back hundreds and hundreds of years. And this is the Masjid Jome in Herat, the Friday Mosque, which is one of the few places in the country to have not been bombed to oblivion during all the fighting. And there's a powerful peace that resonates in this place. I spend a lot of time just sitting on the edges here, watching people walk by, old men praying, young men learning the Quran, and there is a real powerful peace. Some of these mosques in Western Afghanistan are quite similar to Iranian mosques in Esfahan, and because it's a similar style. It's all very old. The tile work here, very intricately done, and you have to plan it out like you would a carpet. And it's some incredible pieces of art. These are scriptures of the Quran written on the wall. This is on the outside of the mosque, so you can see the bullet holes from the fighting around the vase. This is the performance of the play where the female actresses took off their headscarves and sent ripples through the crowd. It was too much for some people. The former minister of Herat, Minister of Education of Herat, got up and left. It was too much for him. But many stayed, and many were overcome with emotion by the end of it, to see the arts returning, something that was unthinkable 5 years ago when the Taliban were in power. This is one of the stories I wanted to write to show that there's more than just body counts coming out of Afghanistan. There are some signs of good news and a return to Afghanistan's glorious past. This is a man outside selling nuts. outside of the citadel. And this is a room full of glass. Herat is famous for this beautiful blue and green blown glass. And they make goblets and vases and all sorts of little glass things. But now there's only one family that knows how to do it anymore, because under the Taliban, the arts were a very low priority. And when people had enough time, most of the time people were scrounging to get by. And when they did have the time, they weren't encouraged to spend it painting pictures or blowing glass like you see here. This is an old beggar on the street, a one-eyed beggar. This is the editor of the Herat Daily News, a daily newspaper, providing there's electricity the night before. Journalism in Afghanistan largely depends on electricity. He can't afford a generator. He gets $100 a month from the BBC in collaboration, and the idea that if he gets a story, he'll give it to them. But what was amazing, his office has one computer, and he's lucky if that's working. What's amazing, though, is I spoke with him at length, and he has exactly the same inspirations as a journalist as all of my colleagues in the journalism school here and the journalists that I've talked to around the world. The inspiration to change things and the real passion for their craft, that what they say can make an impact. And he's doing that despite all the odds. Now I went back to Kabul, and towards the latter part of my stay, I had the chance to join three foreign friends. We rented a Jeep, and we traveled up along this road through some real battle-scarred country, up through Baghlan, which is where two German journalists were recently killed, to Kunduz, a city full of horse carts and women in white burqas, over to Talukan, Faizabad. The paved road ends at Talukan, and the rest is rutted. Road, if you could call it that. It's a generous description. And then from Faizabad to Eshkashem at the mouth of the corridor, and then up halfway into the Wakhan corridor, where we left the Jeep, quite gladly at that point, and got on the backs of horses and followed the Tajik border up here in a loop. It took us about a week into some remote mountains and staying with shepherds that were nomads grazing their flocks on the mountainsides. This is our valiant vehicle, the Land Cruiser Prado, which was a joke. It was about 20 years old, had seen its glory days in the height of the Russian invasion, and went downhill from there. The tires were bald, and we got a discount for that, which was nice, but somehow not adequate when we were up there crossing rivers. We changed about 26 flat tires. We lost track, but we told ourselves that we could change them for NASCAR by the end of it if they gave us a pneumatic drill. We also learned that it advertised four-wheel drive. We learned it was a complete hoax, and it was disheartening when we were crossing these rivers, and we finally realized that there was no four-wheel drive. It was two, sometimes one, when there was no traction. This is driving up through some of the irrigated land. This is the rice basket of Afghanistan. Beautiful, verdant fields. You feel like you're in Southeast Asia sometimes. And the Afghans are masters at irrigation. They'll take a river from high up in the hills and channel it down to their village, or their village will be based around a spring where they can have these gorgeous gardens where they grow a variety of fruits and crops. And this is one example of that. This is an old Soviet tank along the side of the road, one of many. They're just left to lie there and rust under the sun. Both sides of the road are still heavily mined. The whole journey up there are minefields. Red rocks signify that you shouldn't go off wandering the wrong direction for a pee at risk of your legs. And there's all these tanks there that they've been scavenged and parts have been taken. The tracks make up speed bumps sometimes in the road, which is jarring when you pick up enough speed to warrant them. It's a jarring realization. These are two mechanics, a father and a mechanic-to-be, who was frightened a little by the camera. But we spent a lot of time in mechanics shops, got to know them quite well. This is a close-up of opium poppies. We rode through one of the major centers of opium production, which was in the north in Badakhshan province, and it's really interesting. There's ideas for different crops to come out, alternative crops to be planted there. But opium doesn't require a lot of water. Like I said, it's easy to transport. Also, a lot of the farmers are in debt to the drug lords. So in a way, it's the only solution. It's the only way for these farmers to get by under such conditions. This is a field of the flowers, just beautiful, purple and white and pink flowers stretching from mountainside to mountainside in the valley. Here's an example of infrastructure in Afghanistan. This river had collapsed long ago. It's also an example of the ingenious Afghan engineering. They'll find a way despite the odds, and here they've built an extension to the bridge which ferried us across safely over a raging river. Yeah. This is an old man on the side of the road watching it all with a bit of humor. He gave us a good enthusiastic thumbs up. These are around the corner in the center of this opium production center. We rounded the corner at one point and nearly hit a big group of men in the road. These men here. And they were gathered around something, and we couldn't quite figure out what. And I was designated translator for the group, so I got out and sorted out what I could. And they said mine. And I thought, yeah, well, they're taking these mine clearance crews quite seriously. All along the way, there were people digging up old mines left over from the Russians and discarding them and dealing with them. But they had actually found a mine buried in the road here. And it was, you can see it here, the close-up. They found it buried, and they showed us then the wires leading off into a group of just a pile of stones, and then from there was a string that led off into the bushes. And so what it was an improvised explosive device, and someone in the bushes, when the right target came by, would pull the string and blow the vehicle to oblivion. And here we were, a car full of 4 foreigners. So we didn't stay long. We were a bit of an ideal target. So we drove off the side of the road. These are some of the men that helped us. We drove off the side of the road into the ditch and around the end, and ended up driving off. It wasn't until much later that we realized what it was. And what it was, the German military controls Badakhshan province, and they've taken it upon themselves to try and eradicate opium in the area, but they've done it at exactly the wrong time. When we were up there, it was the height of harvest season, when the farmers carefully slit the opium poppies with a razor blade and collect the resin and then use that to make heroin. So it was after a year's worth of labor, finally their crop was coming into season, and they were ready to harvest it, to sell it, and to make their year's money to feed their family and pay their debts. And the Germans came and destroyed some fields. This was severely unpopular, and it wasn't long before farmers came with guns and said they'll defend their fields regardless. So after talking to some people, we figured that this was a bomb in the road for a German military convoy to make a statement as they were riding by. It was a definition of the word desolate, this place. We were in some of the most remote country, a path that Marco Polo followed 800 years ago, and not a whole lot has changed in the way of transportation since then. This is I think we're changing a flat or doing something, as most likely, but just against the backdrop of some stunning mountains. There's a river alongside the road. It was a real lunar landscape. It was really otherworldly. This is a school here. This UNICEF tent was now turned into a school, and there are about a dozen children in there studying away, studying hard, in the middle of nowhere. And that's that was the solution. It was put right in the middle of two villages so that it could function as the school for both villages. So the children would walk upwards of an hour to get to their school each morning, as long as there wasn't work for them to do in the fields or at home. Some of the colors were stunning. This is a real example of, this is a village here, the fields there, and Afghans can make greenery out of solid rock like this, and they've got their fields there of barley and wheat. Here we are trying to cross a river, and this was, it doesn't look very intense, but there were some really deep bits and some dodgy currents flowing very fast, and we realized we only had 2 wheels to run on, and so we're wading through the waters here to try and get by. It's pretty frightening, actually, and we realized that there's a skill to it. This is a car that happened to be up there as well from the Afghan Foundation, the only NGO that's in the region. And the guy was an expert driver. Fortunately, he saved us in the end. He helped us out. You have to drive downstream and then turn up in a U to make it onto the other side without rolling the car. And here we are. This is farther on down the road when we got stuck in a mud puddle, which it turned out to be very difficult. But the amazing thing is, even in the middle of nowhere like this in Afghanistan, there will be people that will come to help you. And out of nowhere, men came with shovels and to help dig us out. There was one guy, the local car expert, who had he owned the only car in the valley, this beat-up old Jeep. I saw it later. It was a Russian Jeep that probably hadn't run in the past 2 decades, but it was there, and he knew about cars, and he practically built a road with stones underneath our Jeep and got it going again. So we had some traction and could push off. This is one of the men that helped us, pitched in, just gladly pitched in, no expectation of payment or return of a favor, just helping for the sake of it. This is when finally, at long last, we abandoned the car and got on horseback and started riding. We're headed towards Tajikistan now. There's a river, the Panj River that cuts the border between Afghanistan and Tajikistan. There's a real powerful landscape that you kind of feel like Lord Byron when you're walking through it. This is up on some of the higher terrain. We would rent horses from every village or so we'd spend the night at a camp, and they would give us horses and send us with a horse guide and someone just to help us, show us the path. And we would get horses, and they got stronger and stronger the farther we got up the valleys. These are the horns of a Marco Polo sheep, which are the largest horned sheep in the world, and there's only about 800 pair of them left between the mountains, the Pamir Mountains of Tajikistan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. We didn't see any. They've retreated to the higher mountains for the summer. But these horns are amazingly heavy. You can just imagine carrying that around every day with you. This is one of the camps that we stayed at. They live in yurts, the Waki shepherds, and they have a flock of about 300 sheep and live on these mountains. They go higher and higher in the summer, and then in the winter they come down back into the lower valleys when it gets too cold and snowy in the high valleys to find pasture. There's about 3 families living in these yurts here, which are quite spacious when you get inside and very cozy. There's a big hearth in the middle of them. This is the headman of that camp, a lovely man. The Waki tradition is we rode into the camp tired after a long day's ride and dismounted. He took us each by the hand and kissed our hands. He said, "Salam alaikum," so peace be upon you. And having not expected us at all, invited us in for the night to share what food he had. We had brought a lot of food with us, so we brought out potatoes and onions, and they were thrilled. They don't eat a lot of vegetables up here. They can't grow anything. They survive off of the milk from their sheep and yaks, and they make cream and yogurt and butter out of this milk, and they make bread, but that's about all they have. Every now and again they kill a sheep for protein, but they're very malnourished. So we brought out our vegetables, and it was like solid gold. These are some of the shepherds. We arrived right as they were milking the goats for the second time that day. This is the mother of this kid here. Beautiful, beautiful people. And the Waki women are more free to go with their heads uncovered and to be around men than they are in other parts of Afghanistan. I could photograph many without worry and without embarrassment on their part. And they wear beautiful jewelry and beads. This is a girl here and her mother, and she really struck me. She could be German almost. There's so much Aryan genetics left over from Alexander the Great and his Macedonian army. And there's blue eyes and blonde hair all over the country. I was even able to fit in some parts. They just thought I was a bit strange for speaking Dari so differently, but maybe slow in the head. But they guessed I was Tajik or northern Afghan at least. It really felt like we were on the roof of the world at points. These mountains, a lot of them are approaching 20,000 feet. The higher ones are well over 20,000. Here we were at about 15,000 feet riding. Some really stunning mountains. I think that's all that can be said about some of these mountains. That's at the end of another day when we had reached another camp at sunset. This is inside a yurt now. This man here on the left, he greeted us into the camp. He only had one eye, and he had this great big hat, this furry hat, that an old Russian hat, and he told us proudly when he heard we were coming from Kabul that he had been to Kabul once, and it was years and years ago, but he had been, and very few people in the Wakhan Quarter have ever been to Kabul. Very few have left the valley itself. There's no real reason to. While the rest of the country was ripped apart by war, the Wakhan Quarter was protected because of its mountains and its remoteness. So here he is in a yurt with his family alongside, the women tending a fire of sage and yak dung. It smelled very sweet, and tending for making some food. They slapped the flatbreads on the side of this clay hearth to cook. These are the hands of the man who greeted us, weathered from years of abuse and cold weather in the north there. They were cracked to the bone. He showed us just blackened and frostbit and mangled. These are two young Waki girls, not at all camera shy and very beautiful with their beads and jewelry. Very proud. Always there's the Afghan hospitality, and early in the morning we were slow to wake because we were saddle sore and tired from a day's riding, but early in the morning they'd knock on our reed door and push their heads through and offer us tea and yogurt for breakfast. They didn't have much at all in these camps, but they were very willing to give us whatever they could. There's two young girls with a goat. One day we were passing a 15,000-foot snowy pass. It was July. This would have been the warmest month of the year up there, but the pass was still snowbound, so they lent us their yaks, and we managed to get our way up the mountainside on these yaks. They're very stable, far more stable than horses. It's like a four-wheel drive vehicle that we'd been missing all this time, with cloven hoofs that grip the snow and ice, and just this real stable feel. We rode on the back of them and just ambled along. They take their time, the yaks, but and they have these great grunts that sound like orcs on the move, really spacey, otherworldly sounds. This is my yak here. We got quite attached. I was leading it down the mountainside after he had slogged up the whole way to the top, and I was leading it down. You lead it by a rope through the nose. It doesn't seem to hurt them much. They're quite content to just plod along. The yaks get really disgruntled when they're under 10,000 feet, though, and we're descending rapidly in altitude here, so he was getting rather tired, and I gave him a break and stopped riding him, because they're high-altitude creatures, so they're made for the extreme conditions. This is Mount Kurut. At the end of our journey, we descended into the valley right below it. This is well over 20,000 feet. As we were walking down our yaks down the path, we saw an avalanche come down the side of the mountain. Just a stunning sight to end the journey. This is a Waki man walking into the wilds. He joined us for a day of the travels, and yeah, that's how remote it was. And that's all the photographs I have. Now, if you have any questions, I know we have a bit of time for that, so I'd be happy to answer those. Thank you. Thank you. All the way in the back there.
I'm curious, what, if anything, did you learn from speaking with any of the women there? Are there any women who have any influence whatsoever? And was there any comment on climate change at all?
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. The question was, what did I learn from the women in Afghanistan? And are there any women in positions of power? And was there any reference to climate change in Afghanistan? First, with the women, to be honest, I didn't have a lot of opportunities to speak with Afghan women. I did in different parts. I did in the Wakhan, I did in Herat in Western Afghanistan, where conditions are different than in Kabul. In Herat, I spoke with women, part of a women's union, which would have been unheard of 5 years ago. But they were amazing women. Indoors, I could speak with them at length about politics. They would tell me exactly what they thought, exactly where the men were going wrong, exactly what they thought of, like women anywhere. But they had no fear. But as soon as we were out on the street again, rather foolishly, I tried to, when I was saying goodbye to one, I tried to shake one by the hand, and she was very embarrassed. It's something that you don't do in Afghanistan on the streets. So there are these levels. There are women in the parliament now. There's one young one, a very fiery young one, Malai Joya, who is she's causing a bit of a ruckus, calling the ex-warlords on their crimes and making sure that this is not forgotten in Afghanistan. So they do have positions of power. There are female governors in some of the provinces, but it's improving, but slowly. Climate change, I didn't hear any reference to, and I don't know about that. Any more questions here? Yes.
Is Hamid Karzai adequate for his task?
Yeah, the question is Hamid Karzai adequate for his task? It's difficult. It's very difficult to say. I think he's certainly one of the most intelligent leaders, and certainly he's well suited for the diplomacy and dealing with the Western powers in his country and dealing with militaries. He's not so good at rallying the Afghans behind him. he tries to be inclusive. He's trying as hard as he can to be inclusive. Afghanistan has always been hard to control. You can understand by a central government. It's just the topography, everything, the infrastructure. Traditionally has been a series of independent fiefdoms, of warlords. It's very hard to control with the central government. Hamid Karzai is doing his best. I think he can achieve some success. But in the end, there will need to be a leader with more rallying power, a leader with more respect from everyday Afghans across the board, not just the educated in Kabul. Yes, ma'am.
Where do the people in this last area you showed us, they're really remote?
Right.
From where do they get their goods, particularly their clothes? They're beautiful clothes. Do they make them?
Beautiful clothes, yeah. The question is, where do the people of the Wakhan corridor get their goods and their clothes and etc.? They make a lot. They use yak's wool and the wool from their sheep to make a lot of their clothes. Some of it was machine produced, and I imagine they would get it from Pakistan. There are routes that you can take over to Chitral and in Pakistan administered Kashmir. I imagine a lot of it comes from there, perhaps some from Tajikistan as well. What was interesting is along the way, in the early stages when we were following the Tajik border, there were roads and lights and electricity on the Tajik side, nothing on the Afghan side. We hadn't seen anything like that for 3 days of a journey, but Tajikistan still had roads and electricity. Right, the gentleman in the red shirt there.
During the war that took place after 2001, there were rumors that Osama bin Laden had escaped or had been rumored to go that direction. Did those people up there talk about that at all?
Yeah, there is. I think the question is, did Osama bin Laden escape through the Wakhan corridor? I think historically, the Wakhan is too intense. When they say the porous mountain border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, usually they're talking about the lower reaches of it, not in the Wakhan. There was mention of warlords hiding in some of the hills in the southern part of the corridor, and there was a bit of talk of that, but no one saying anything conclusively, and all of it basically speculation. Yeah, Ellen. In what language do they speak in Afghanistan? They speak Dari is the main language. They also speak another language is Pashto, which I didn't learn. It's very difficult. It involves a lot of movements of the mouth, which I haven't done yet, and similar to Welsh, really, shortage of consonants, sorry, vowels. So Dari is the main language, which is very similar to Farsi, which they speak in Iran, and it's kind of an older version of Farsi. So Iranians will laugh at the Afghans for speaking like Shakespeare would in English. Yes?
Is the former king still alive,
Zahir Shah? He is still alive. I don't know a great deal about his whereabouts and what he's doing now. The princes are very active in Kabul right now. They're in positions of influence. And in the Wakhan, actually, we rode by one of his hunting lodges. He would go up in the early 70s to go hunt Marco Polo sheep in the area. There's still a feeling of respect towards him, though. Yeah. Then the white cap there.
You mentioned encountering Afghans with fierce national pride, and as you just said, national unity is essential to building infrastructure. So I was wondering how that national pride manifests itself in
The question is about Afghan nationalism, and yeah, it's a fascinating thing. There's a rise saying that Afghanistan is only at peace when it's at war, and this is seen in the Soviet invasion. It's one of the most compelling times in recent history where the whole country has united to fight a common enemy, and they really did unite beyond ethnicity, beyond tribe, beyond language barrier. They united to drive the Russians from Afghan soil. That was their cause, and there is this powerful pride of being Afghan, the pride of what it means to be Afghan, what it means to have an Afghan history, what it means to be skilled on the battlefield, to have managed to stay independent despite these two great empires fighting for your territory. And that's just what might save Afghanistan, is the nationalism. Right, and here.
What are the yurts? What do we call those tent-like things? Are those made of animal hide?
Yeah, the yurts, they're made of felt, pounded felt. They're very warm. They have a hearth in the middle and a small hole that lets in the starlight at night and for the smoke to go out. They can get really smoky, especially when it's cold, and they cover up the hole. But they're built with this beautiful curved wood. There's no nails involved in the process, just string and felt and wood. They're magnificent structures. Yeah, Lucas.
How common is it for people to dress Western or traditionally, or how does that differ among your country and the men and women?
The question is about dress. How often is it for men and women to wear national dress? Amongst women, it's ubiquitous. They always wear Afghan dress. Often it's a burqa, which is a full covering with holes to see out of. Often it's a burqa when women are going outside. Although quite often, and especially in places like Herat, and in the Wakhan Koda, I didn't see a burqa at all. In places like Herat, often women will go out just with scarves. Amongst men, it's very common to wear the shalwar kameez, which is what I'm wearing here. Amongst the well-to-do in Kabul, there are more and more people wearing Western shirts and ties and etc. But
is there any disputes or scorn between people who dress Western?
There is, yeah, like anywhere, the crotchety old types try to keep the young ones in line, especially with dress. And but more than that, beards are a big thing. If you don't grow a beard, a lot of young Afghans are clean shaven because they can be for the first time in a very long time. And there's, amongst some of the more religious elderly, there's a feeling that they're rebuking Islam and that they're going down the wrong path. So there is this sense of get back in line. The blue, yeah. Definitely, the medical needs in the Wakhan Koda, they're huge. You can see a lot of the children have reddish hair, signs of malnutrition. A lot of them have common sicknesses. When we were there, they would complain of common sicknesses, pains in their heart, they'd say, pains in their stomach, pains that we gave out a lot of ibuprofen is what we had. Funny enough, there's a very eccentric Englishman and his family living up in one of these valleys along the road with a sturdy vehicle. And he's been up there for the last 3 or 4 years. It's sort of a heart of darkness type of a character. We had the chance to meet him. He's an amazing guy. He's known as Dr. Alex throughout the land. And he goes by foot or by horse to some of these remote shepherds' camps to help them with their medical needs. Yes, they're in the middle there. Yeah, in the purple or grey. Yeah. Sorry. Question is, what would it be like for an American woman traveling in Afghanistan? I don't think nationality has so much to do with it. First off, I had no problem telling people I was American, although I came in under a British passport and more often than not would say I was British, which didn't help much, really. The British are bombing the hell out of Helmand province. But as a woman, there are different reports. I spent a lot of time with an English girl there who was, she said it wasn't so strange for her to go into a restaurant and to go and sit with a woman. It was in fact an experience that I was missing out on entirely. And I experienced that at a young age when I saw that happening with my mother and my sister. They had access to the inner courtyards of the compounds and places where my father and I could never go. We would be outside drinking tea, talking politics and war with the men, while they were inside laughing and joking and seeing really what's happening in an everyday Afghan family's life. A lot of the women journalists actually in Afghanistan are more successful than the male journalists, the foreign correspondents, because they have this ability to kind of, they're not a challenge to the people they're interviewing. They're not, there's not a sense of manhood that has to be protected. It's just a polite question and answer session, which often yields a lot more information than if a guy were to come in and maybe be a bit confrontational about that. Yes, Clem.
Jacob, did you get a sense of how higher education has recovered since the days of the Taliban, and particularly education?
The question is about education, higher education, and especially among women, and how it's improved in Afghanistan. It has improved. Teachers, university professors are still very poorly paid, just like the police, just like any government position in Afghanistan. They don't receive the wages to justify their work and what they do there. So there's very low morale amongst a lot of people. Although, that said, there are certainly, I met some professors who were very dedicated to what they did and saw the future of Afghanistan being in these young people they were educating. It's improving. Still, anyone with money will send their child to Pakistan for an education, to India if they're able, perhaps to Iran. Although these numbers, now the refugees are coming back. They're flooding back in from Pakistan and Iran back to Afghanistan. Yeah, right there.
Did you watch a cricket game?
Did I watch a cricket game? I didn't actually, although there's an emerging team happening now, and they do a bit of traveling when they're able, and it's they love it. Yeah. Any more? Dean Brown has a way to intimidate people. No, it's good.
One more question? Any more? We'll take one more question if somebody's got one. This lady right here's had her hand up a long time.
How did you keep the car going? Fuel? Where did fuel come from?
Yeah, the question is how did we keep the car fueled in the Wakhan corridor? It was actually, well, the funny thing is we weren't covering a great deal of distance, so that's why, as far as the we could fill up in some of these towns up here in some of the cities towards the north there. Once we got into the corridor, there was no fuel, but I guess it was a bit of a miracle. We didn't. I don't know. The gas that is there. Well, there's no cars there, but any gas can be found in Eshkashem, the village at the mouth of the corridor, and that came from Tajikistan, I think. But yeah, it's few and far between petrol.
Thank you, Jacob. Yeah. I see that there are a number of lawyers in the room, and they need to get to bed early. So if you would like to stay around and speak to Jacob, there are some refreshments up here, but we really appreciate this, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Real education.